Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a good weekend, and we are back for more biology. Last week, we learned about the scientific method, and today we're starting a new topic, which is macromolecules. So macromolecules are basically really big molecules. We learn about water being a small molecule. It's H2O. It has two hydrogen and one oxygen. When we talk about macromolecules, they are really big compared to water. They consist of hundreds and sometimes thousands of atoms in it. And there are four major macromolecules that we're going to be looking at in lecture 2. But before we get into that, we actually have to do a little bit of chemistry first. Now, I know you guys are also taking chemistry, but I have no control in terms of what you learn in chemistry up to this point in the course. And sometimes, depending on the teacher, you might have learned things um, that are useful in biology, and or sometimes you might not be at that point yet. So instead of relying on the chemistry course to teach you the chemistry knowledge that you need for this lecture, I'm just going to teach you some basic chemistry that you would need in order to understand the macromolecules. So some of these things might be, repetition from your chem class. Some of the information might be new, but you got to know them before we can go into the macromolecules. So here we go. Matter. Matter is anything that takes up space and has mass. So it has volume and it has mass to it. Okay, it can be solid, liquid, or gas, and it could cycle between the different states. If you think about water, it could exist as a solid in ice form. Drinking water, liquid water, is what we are most familiar with. And it can also vaporize and become water vapor in a gas state. So all matter is actually made up of elements. And elements, by definitions, are substances that cannot be broken down into other substances. Okay, so if you think of oxygen as an element, you can't break down oxygen further to create new substance. Whereas if you think about water, you can actually run electric current through water and you can split it back into hydrogen and oxygen. So water is not an element because you are able to break it down further into other substances. It's only an element if you can't break it down further. The smallest unit of an element, the individual building block, if you would, of an element is an atom. And each atom is going to have the same chemical and physical properties of the element that it represents. Okay, so physical property, we're talking about things like melting point. We're talking about whether solid, gas, or liquid at room temperature. Whereas chemical properties, we are describing its ability to react with other things. So atoms consist of subatomic particles. Okay? In the center of an atom, we have the nucleus. Okay? And in the nucleus, there are protons and neutrons. Protons are positively charged and neutrons are no charge. And kind of whizzing around the nucleus, going around in circles around the nucleus, are these electrons, which are negatively charged. Right? So again, you will learn, if you haven't already, you will learn a lot more about these things, these atoms, in your chemistry class. Right? For now, I need you to understand there are positively charged protons in the middle, and then flying around, there are negatively charged electrons. Okay? And these are things that you will find inside an atoms. And atoms is the smallest unit of an element. So how do you know if something is an element? Right? Like if I ask you, like, is steel an element? How would you know? Well, you would look at the periodic table. And the periodic table lists all the elements that has been discovered so far. There are like 118-ish of them. And if it's on the periodic table, then it's going to be an element. So you can, I mean, these are symbols, but in your chemistry class, you would have a periodic table that actually tells you what the symbols are, right? Some you probably know already. C is for carbon, S is for sulfur, right? So on and so forth. And if you try to look for steel, there is no steel on the periodic table. So you can say steel is not an element. Right? Steel is actually iron with a bit of carbon in it. Right? So that's not an element because it consists of two different elements, right? If you think about it. So even though there are hundreds of elements that makes up everything that we know of in the universe, the human bodies actually only consist of 5 of these elements primarily. Okay? Over 96% of the human body, in fact, composed of just 5 elements on the periodic table. Okay? So they are carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, and phosphorus. Okay? So carbon is like, when you have a pencil, the tip here, people call it lead, but it's actually not lead. Probably like in the past, at some point, it was lead, but you might know lead is poisonous, right? So it's actually graphite nowadays, and graphite is a form of carbon. Where else do you find carbon? Right? Like what is a very expensive form of carbon that people might have on them?
Diamond.
That's right. Diamond is pure carbon, right? So we actually have a lot of carbon in our body, although is not in the pure form. Okay. Nitrogen, 70% of the air that we breathe consists of nitrogen. We just can't use them from the air. We breathe it in and then we breathe it out. That's pretty much it. Some of your car tires might be infused with nitrogen. If the little screw cap is green, it means, it contains nitrogen in there. Oxygen, of course, is something we need. About 21% of the air that we breathe is oxygen, and we cannot live without it. You probably are familiar with hydrogen. It's a very low density gas. You can fill balloons with it, and it floats. But because it's very flammable, people use helium instead to fill balloons. And phosphorus. Okay, phosphorus is flammable, so it's at some point it was used as a material that is on the head of the match. Right. Sometimes they put it on the striking surface as well, but when you strike it, the friction creates the ignition and then the fire. So that's phosphorus. In addition to the 5 elements that I just showed you, there are also trace elements in the body. Trace elements are elements that are only required in small quantity. You only need a little bit of it. Right? If you have too much, then it's going to cause problems for you. If you don't have enough, that's also going to cause problems for you. Okay, so deficiency or overdose in trace elements will usually result in some disease conditions. So here are examples of trace elements that we need in the body. Zinc, okay, we need a bit of zinc for the immune system. You probably are familiar with calcium. We need it to have strong bones. Too much calcium is not good. It's going to start depositing in your kidneys and give you kidney stone. And too much calcium in the blood can actually cause you to have uncontrolled trauma. Okay? But of course, not enough calcium is going to cause your bones to become weakened. Iodine is another one. Does anybody know what organ in the body needs iodine? There's only one organ in the whole body that needs iodine. Does anybody know what it is? Starts with a T. Yes, Fahima is correct. The thyroid, and the thyroid is right here, okay? It's around your neck. It uses iodine to make hormones to help regulate your metabolism. You don't have to memorize any of these, okay? I'm just trying to give you examples to help you, see the relevance of it. And what you do need to know is what are the key elements and then examples of trace elements. If I give you a list of them and I say, which of the following is a trace element? You should be able to pick it out, okay? Magnesium, it's needed for muscle contraction as well. So you can actually buy these supplements, right? If you are particularly lacking in one of these trace elements, I wouldn't recommend you taking it on your own, right? You should do it because your doctor tells you to do it, right? A lot of people, take calcium supplements, but like I said, is actually you have to be careful how much you take. You don't want to be overdose. It could cause problems for, say, your kidneys, right? So here are two examples of what happens when you don't have enough trace element of a particular kind. Iodine deficiency can lead to goiter. Goiter is the enlargement of the thyroid gland. Okay, so I just told you earlier, the thyroid makes hormones for you to regulate metabolism, but if you don't have enough iodine, then the thyroid gets really, really big. Okay, so that's called goiter. It's not so much a common situation in Canada. I mean, iodine deficiency is only one cause of goiter. There are other causes of it, but goiter caused by iodine deficiency is not very common in Canada. Because how do we get our iodine? Does anybody know? Like, how do
Fish
you? Okay, yeah, fish, good.
and seafood.
Anyone else? Where can you find iodine? Yes, the salt. Okay, the salt we have, uh, they are iodinized. Okay, they add iodine to it so that we don't have deficiency. Okay, but you're right. Seafood is an excellent source of iodine if you are, if you're buying salts that are not iodinized. Calcium deficiency can lead to osteoporosis. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this name. This is what happens when your bone gets very brittle, right? The body is absorbing the calcium from the bone because you're not getting enough from your diet, and the bone gets really, really weak. And if you fall, you can break a hip or something like that. Okay. So the key elements in the body, we have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. And then trace element include things like iodine, calcium, magnesium, zinc, so on and so forth. Any questions so far? Just want to take a quick pause here and see if anybody have any question. Sorry, I'm just checking email. There's a student who's trying to join the class but does not have the link. Okay, I'm just gonna reply him quickly. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, so next we're gonna talk about something called isotopes. Okay, isotopes are atoms of the same elements, but they have different number of neutrons. Okay, they have different number of neutrons. Remember, in an atom, we have the proton, the electron, and the neutrons. Protons of the same elements are always going to be the same. Okay? If you take a look at carbon, a carbon is always going to have 6 protons. Okay, but there are different kinds of carbon. There are carbon 12, carbon 13, and even carbon 14. They all have 6 protons, okay? but carbon-12 has 6 neutrons, carbon-13 has 7 neutrons, carbon-14 has 8 neutrons. You don't have to understand how to calculate them. Your chemistry class will teach you that, okay? But you have to understand what an isotope is. An isotope is basically atoms of the same element that have different number of neutrons, okay? So some are heavier than others. If it has more neutrons, for example, carbon-14, that's going to be heavier than carbon-12. And some isotopes, they are more stable than others. And if it's unstable, it's going to break down on its own naturally. Okay, so as it's broken down, it gives off radiation. And these unstable isotopes can have a wide range of application. For example, carbon-14 is used in carbon dating. If they discover some skeletons, some remains of either humans or animals, like dinosaurs or something, they can use carbon dating to figure out how old the organism was when it died. Iodine-131 can be used to treat thyroid cancer because the thyroid is the only organ that uses iodine. When you inject radioactive iodine into the body, it will automatically go to the thyroid. And as it breaks down in the thyroid, the radiation will kill the cancerous cells. If you have a smoke detector at home, and you should, because it's safety and it's the law that you should have a smoke detector, there's a little bit of americium 241 in it, okay? And it's not harmful radiation. It's not going to be dangerous for you, but the radiation is an essential part of how the smoke detector function. I don't have time to go into the details, but I'm sure you can look it up online to see how it works. But these are some examples of where isotopes are being used in real life, okay? Besides isotopes, there are also ions. When an atom gains electron or lose electron, then it can become positively charged or negatively charged, right? So gain electron or electrons, then it's going to become negatively charged. Because electron are negative, right? If it lose electron, then it's going to become positively charged. Okay. So to quickly recap, everything we know in the universe is made up of elements. The smallest unit of an element is an atom. Atoms have protons, which are positive, electrons, which are negative, and neutrons, which are neutral, no charge. Atoms of the same element have the same number of protons. Right? All the carbon atoms would have the same number of protons. All the nitrogen atoms would have same number of protons, okay? But the number of neutrons might be different. And in those cases, we call them isotopes. Sometimes the number of electrons is going to be different. It might gain electrons or lose electrons, then they become ions, okay? So ions are very important because they are what we call electrolytes. When you drink sport drinks, they have water and a lot of sugar in it, but more importantly, you're drinking it to replenish your electrolytes. When you sweat, you lose a lot of electrolytes. So common electrolytes that we need in the body include things like sodium. It's positively charged because it lost an electron. Chloride, potassium, magnesium, these are all important electrolytes that keeps our body functioning. Okay, and when our electrolytes are very low because of dehydration, for example, then our body might shut down and not function. Okay, so that's that. Okay, let's take a look at molecules and compounds. atoms can actually combine in fixed proportion to form molecules. We are already familiar with this concept. I asked you last time, what is the formula for water? And you guys told me is H2O, right? So all the water that exists is going to be H2O. If someone tries to sell you H3O, like don't buy it. It's not water. Okay. All the water is 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen. Okay. So it's fixed proportion. Once you combine the atoms, you get a molecule. You get a compound, and the smallest unit of a compound is a molecule. So here is an example of a compound. Now let me give you an example. This is sodium. Okay? Sodium is a metal. Okay, and this is the elemental form of sodium. It's actually comes like it's a little bit like a block, and it's really soft. You can cut it with just a kitchen knife, okay? Even though it's a metal, but it's super soft, okay? And it's very reactive with water. You can search this up on YouTube, okay? Explosive sodium or something. You will see people drop blocks of sodium into like a bucket of water, and then you will see explosion going on. Okay, it reacts violently in the presence of water. That's why the person is wearing gloves. Yeah, because the moisture in your skin might set off a reaction with the sodium. Yeah, and if you do have sodium, you need to store it under oil so that it's not going to react with the moisture. Okay, so very, very explosive stuff. Now let me backtrack a little bit here. When we say we need sodium in the body, and we do, because sodium is an essential electrolyte, we are not saying we have these elemental form of sodium. Okay? When we say we need sodium in the body, we're talking about the ionized form. Okay? So the sodium lost an electron and it's dissolved in water. That's very stable. That's not going to be explosive. Okay, so this is the elemental form in its purest form. Okay, sodium. So what is the sodium made up of? Well, if we are able to, hypothetically zoomed in, we would be able to see sodium atoms. Right? Each sodium atoms would have the same number of protons. Some might have extra neutrons than others, but they are all sodium atoms. All right, chlorine. Chlorine is a very, very poisonous gas. Where do you hear people use chlorine? The pools, that's right. Okay. And again, yep, it's the pool, the water, right? Dechlorinate your water, right? Now, again, I got to stress the importance of this. When we say we use chlorine in the pool or when we have chlorine in the bleach, it's not the elemental form, okay? It's usually an ionized form, and sometimes it's even combined with something else, okay? In its purest form, though, chlorine gas is poisonous. You breathe in chlorine, it destroys your lungs. You die very quickly. In fact, chlorine gas was used as a weapon, right, during I think the Second World War. So you don't want to be keeping these things in your home. However, when you combine sodium and chlorine, they would react together, and you would get a compound, and the compound is sodium chloride. Okay? In chemistry, you'll learn how to name these things properly. Sodium chloride, if you zoom in and see what it's made up of, then it has the sodium chloride molecule. Each sodium chloride molecule has 1 sodium and 1 chlorine in it. Okay, so sodium chloride is actually table salt. So an important point here to note is that even though the compound consists of sodium and chlorine, right? The property is very different compared to the elemental form. Okay, table salt is very stable. It's not explosive. It's not poisonous. Okay, and you sprinkle it on fries, right? And nothing really happens. It just makes it taste better, right? So when you combine elements, they usually create something new, and that new compound behaves very differently, both chemically and physically. Okay. Now, how do you connect the atoms together, right? Like sodium and chloride, how do you put them together? Same thing in the water, H2O, how do you combine the hydrogen and the oxygen together? Well, we use a kind of like chemical glue, okay? And depending on how the atoms are connected, we can classify them as ionic or covalent. I'm just going to briefly talk about it. I know I keep on saying this, but you will learn more about this in chemistry. For the purpose of biology, I need you to understand that ionic bond involves a transfer of electron. Okay, sometimes more than one. Okay, so these tend to be stronger compared to covalent bond. When the sodium reacts with the chlorine, the sodium donates an electron to chlorine, and that's why sodium becomes positive, because it lost an electron. And chlorine, having picked up that extra electron, is going to be negative now. So this transfer of electron creates a glue, a chemical bond that holds them together. On the other hand, the covalent bond, instead of a transfer of electron, it involves the sharing of electrons. Sometimes it can be more than one. Okay, and it's weaker than the ionic bond, but it's still reasonably strong. Okay, and all the macromolecules that we'll be learning, they are held together. The atoms are held together by covalent bond. Right? So I want you to know the difference. Okay. Ionic bond, it's a transfer of electron. Covalent bond is a sharing of electrons. So we hear organics a lot these days, right? Like people want to buy organic food because this supposedly is healthier. And you can even buy clothing that are organic. Okay? But in the sense of like biochemistry or chemistry, like what is the meaning of organic? Organic just means anything that contains carbon. It's a very different definition than how we use it in terms of food. Okay. If you look at a molecule, if it contains carbon, then it's going to be an organic molecule. Many biologically important molecules are organic. Not all of them are organic, but many of them are, including things like glucose. Okay? So glucose is C6H12O6 because it contains carbon. It's an organic molecule. Proteins. Right? Proteins contain carbon. There is no formula for protein. It depends on which protein you're looking at. Okay, we're going to talk more about that. Not all organic molecules are found in a living system necessarily. Okay, some organic molecules they contain carbons, and yet they have nothing to do with the living system. Right? Polyester. Okay? You find polyester in your windbreaker, right? Methane is a greenhouse gas. Okay? Methane is CH4. That's organic. If you cook with a non-stick pan, that black stuff on top of it, it's called Teflon. That is an organic molecule. It contains carbon. Now, there are some exceptions. The people who came up with these rules, they're like, okay, let's confuse people, okay? Carbon monoxide, CO, that's what this is. Carbon dioxide and cyanide. These three things, even though they have carbon atoms in it, they are by definition not organic. Okay. So if I give you a list of molecules and I say, which one are organics, you can pick out all the ones with carbon, but not these ones. Okay. Again, CO is carbon monoxide. Poisonous, right? You're supposed to have a detector for that as well. Carbon dioxide, which is something we breathe out, and then cyanide. Cyanide is very poisonous. And we'll learn why later on in lecture 5. Okay, we're almost done with the chemistry stuff. So, water molecules are polar. That's another important word to learn. Okay, polar means part of the molecule is slightly positive. Sorry, my writing. While another part is slightly negative. Okay, but overall, the molecule is still neutral. Overall, the molecule is neutral. Okay. So let me backtrack a little bit in case you're not following. When something is neutral, it means the number of electrons are equal to the number of protons. Okay? If you have 5 electrons and 5 protons, then it's neutral because electron is negative and proton is positive, right? Positive and negative cancels each other out. As long as you have same number of electron and same number of proton, it's neutral. Okay? So when we say something is polar, the whole molecule is neutral. The whole molecule has equal number of electrons and protons. However, the distribution of these electrons is not even on the molecule. It's not uniformly distributed. So the electron tends to be pulled towards one side of the molecule than the other, and therefore making it slightly negative in that location. Let's draw it out to see. Okay, so this is how people draw water. Okay, it's like Mickey Mouse with the ear, okay, but no eyes. So these are the hydrogens, and this is the oxygen right there. Okay, so this is a covalent bond. The hydrogen and the oxygen are sharing electron. Hydrogen atom and oxygen atom are sharing electron. But it is an uneven sharing. Okay? It's like my 2 kids. I buy them a toy and then I'm like, hey, you guys got to share it, okay? I'm only buying one. And they're like, okay, we'll share. But then my older one is always like hogging it afterwards, right? Like even though they're sharing, but my older one is usually playing with it more, okay? And so that's basically what happens here. Even though the hydrogen and oxygen are sharing the electron, but because of its property, oxygen will pull the electron towards itself, right? So like the electron will stay more on the oxygen side, and it makes it slightly negative. Okay, this symbol that looks like an 8 but is not complete, that's slightly, okay? Slightly negative. And the hydrogen becomes slightly positive. So when a molecule is slightly positive on one side and slightly negative on the other side, we call it polar. Polar molecules are important for several reasons, but one of the reasons is that if you put 2 polar molecules next to each other, so I'm going to draw another one right here. Hey, this is slightly positive, slightly negative. Oops, wrong color. If you put 2 water molecules next to each other, the slightly positive hydrogen of one molecule is actually going to be attracted to the slightly negative oxygen. And this attraction allows water molecules to cling to each other. And this is what we call a hydrogen bond. We'll talk about hydrogen bond a lot, okay? You can just think of hydrogen bond as kind of like a glue between molecules, right? They allow the water to cling together, right? That's why when you drop water onto a surface, like think of like a um we don't have pennies anymore, but like think of like a dime or something. Think of a dime, and then you are dropping water onto it with an eyedropper, right? How many drops of water do you think you can fit on this thing if you're dropping water on it? How many drops? What do you guys think? Give me some wild guesses. What do you think? One drop, two drop, 10 drops. How many drops do you think? Okay. Well, if you actually do this, 2 drops, we have people say, yeah, you can actually do, if you do it slowly, okay, using a standard eyedropper, you can easily go like 15, 20 drops, okay? Because the water is going to form a dome shape like that, okay? So the water molecule is actually clinging onto each other, grabbing onto each other with the hydrogen bond so that it doesn't spill over, right? Okay? It's the same reason why some bugs can walk on water because of this stickiness of water. It forms a film, right? We call that surface tension. Okay, so in this picture, you can see all these interactions. All these are hydrogen bond. Hydrogen bond. It allows the water molecules to act as magnets that would, stick to each other. Water is also useful in a biological system because it's a very good solvent. Okay? So a solvent is usually a liquid that would dissolve something else. So if you think of one of these Kool-Aid package, it's powder. This would be the solute. If you add it to the water, which would be the solvent, then you get a solution. A solution. So our body is basically mostly water, and then there are many solute that are dissolved in it. Things like the electrolytes that we talked about, like glucose is going to be dissolved in the water. Waste product is going to be dissolved in the water. If something can be dissolved in water, then we call that molecule, we call that hydrophilic. Hydro is water. Philic is loving. Right? These are like Latin words, right? Hydrophilic. If something can be dissolved in water, then it's hydrophilic. Right? Polar things can be dissolved in water. Ionic things can be dissolved in water. So NaCl, sodium chloride, as you learn, is an ionic molecule because there is a transfer of electron, right? So when you dissolve salt in water, because the sodium is positive, it will be surrounded by the oxygen portion of the water. Whereas the chlorine is negative, it will be surrounded by the hydrogen portion of the water. And this allows you to separate the NaCl, and it dissolves into it. Okay, so that's a hydrophilic molecule. Can you guys give me some other examples of hydrophilic substances, things that can dissolve in water besides salt? Okay, yeah, sugar. Yeah, sugar is hydrophilic. Doesn't have to be a solid. You can think of a liquid that mixes with water. What else can dissolve in water besides salt and sugar? Anything else? Cotton candy, that's an interesting one. Yeah, but cotton candy is like sugar, right? Basically. If you ever see a cotton candy machine, you add sugar in the middle and then you spun it, right? Yeah, food coloring, that's a good one. That's hydrophilic. Yeah, juice, sure, sounds good. One more maybe, please. Instant coffee. Yep, that's a good one. That's exactly what I was thinking of. Coffee. And like vinegar, right? Okay, so all these things are hydrophilic. They can dissolve in water. All right, you need to know this where it's gonna be we're gonna be using it a lot. Okay. Now, give me one thing that cannot be mixed with water, that cannot dissolve in water. I'm sure you know. Yeah. Oil, exactly. So oil and other non-polar molecules, and non-polar means the molecule is not slightly positive here and slightly negative there, right? There's even distribution of electron in that case. So they cannot dissolve in water, and we call them hydrophobic. Okay? Phobic is like the word phobia. It's afraid of water. Okay? So water loving and water hating. Okay, it's afraid of it or hating it. Other examples of hydrophobic molecules would be things like wax, and wax does not dissolve in water, right? Hot wax, right? Like we drop it on, it just floats on top, right? You know what? I always wanted to look up this video to show in class, but I never forget to do it. I always remember when I get to this slide, and then after class, I always forget. Anyway, I'm just gonna tell you about it, and you can look it up. Did you know there are these sprays that you can buy, and you can spray it on your shoes, and it makes a hydrophobic coating around your shoes. So you can literally run through a muddy puddle, and your shoes will not get dirty, right? Because the muddy puddle is like all water with mud, right? But if you have a hydrophobic coating, the water won't cling onto the fabric of your shoes, and it stays white. Okay, it's pretty cool. You can actually spray that stuff on your hand. Not sure why you would do that, but I saw a YouTube person did it. People do all sorts of stuff on YouTube, right? They spray on the hand, and then they stick the hand in water, and it's not gonna get wet. Like you actually can see the water kind of forming a layer of insulation around the hand because it wouldn't want to touch these hydrophobic stuff. Okay, just search up hydrophobic spray. It's very entertaining to watch. I promise you that. So hydrophilic dissolves in water. Things that are polar can dissolve in water. Hydrophobic does not dissolve in water. Right? So things that are hydrophobic would be good to form a water-resistant barrier, like your skin. Right? You drop you drop water on the skin. The water is not going to go right through, right? It stays on top. Your skin is hydrophobic to a certain extent. Okay? pH scale. The pH scale, it measures whether something is acidic or if it's basic. Right? Acidic is things that are like sour, things that are corrosive, and example would be like lemon juice, tomatoes. Milk is actually a little bit acidic, and you have acid in your stomach, right? That is hydrochloric acid. All these things are acidic, and it has a pH that's less than 7. Okay. Basic is when the pH is greater than 7. So these things tends to be slippery feeling. They are also corrosive. It can like eat through metals. They are bitter if you taste it. Okay? Think of like baking soda. I once mistakenly add baking soda as opposed to sugar for my muffins, and they all turn out like extremely bitter, right? Cleaning products are mostly basic. Okay, bleach is basic. Ammonia, it's basic. Water is neutral. So when something is 7, then it's neutral. Okay. So pH is very important for our body, especially in the blood. We need our blood pH to be about 7.35 to 7.45. Okay, that's normal blood pH range. If the blood becomes lower than 7.35, it's too acidic, right? Then we say it's acidosis, right? When we use the suffix osis, it's like too much of something in the body. So acidosis is too much acid. Alkalosis is too much base. Both of these situations are dangerous. Okay. So your respiratory system, your urinary system actually would help maintain homeostasis for your blood pH. It try to keeps it within this narrow range. And you also have these things called buffers in the blood that helps you prevent drastic changes in pH. Okay? You don't have to memorize any of these things. You will learn about it when we do the second semester materials. Okay, but pH is another important aspect. So I think that's it. That is it for the chemistry stuff. Let's quickly do a poll. Go ahead.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course, please.
So what should we do? I can see just a page. I cannot see the question.
It's in the part. You cannot see my screen? Is that what you're saying?
I can see your screen, but just there is a select our correct answer. That's it.
Oh yeah. So yeah, the question is on the PowerPoint, right? You see the PowerPoint slide here?
Oh no, I cannot see that one.
Maybe move the poll window away, and then you
Oh
would be
yeah,
able.
I found it.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you so much.
no problem. All right, that was a minute. I only got 7 responses. Are you guys okay? Like, are you still deciding, or what's going on? All right, let's end that one. So, water is polar because it has uneven distribution of electron. And that's the answer, right? Remember they're sharing the electron, but it's uneven sharing. It's not like you get it 50% time and I get it 50% of the time. If that's the case, then 50-50, it's even, but it's more like 70 and 30. So the oxygen is slightly negative, and then the hydrogens are slightly positive. Okay, so that's the answer, C. Okay, moving on. So I know there are a lot of materials, right? Like a lot of new materials, especially if you are new to this subject. So that's why there are the recordings for you to watch again if you need to hear it one more time. And don't forget to do the study guides. They are very important in helping you prepare for the quiz. So now we're going to talk about the macromolecules, okay? And there are 4 kinds, as I told you. We have carbohydrates. Some people call them carbs. So these include things like pasta that you eat, rice, bread. They all have carbohydrates in it. There are good carbohydrates and some are not so good. My sugary stuff are less healthy examples of carbohydrates. Proteins you will find in meat. If you are vegetarian or vegan, then you would get your protein from soy product, perhaps, tofu, mushroom have protein as well, and lipids are you can get it from things like butter, oil, and the 4th macromolecule is nucleic acids. Anything that you eat that comes from a living organism would have nucleic acid in them. Okay. So I think for today we will have time for carbohydrates and lipids, and then and then proteins and nucleic acid we will have to finish off on Thursday. So here we go. Macromolecules, by now you should know, macro means big. These are really, really big molecules. And we can actually think of them as polymers. Okay? Polymers are basically long chains of molecules that are consist of some individual building blocks. These building blocks are called monomers. So let me try to draw this out for you so that you have like a visual representation of what's going on. So we can think of it like this. We have these little balls here, okay, and these would be called monomers. You can think of the monomers as building blocks, kind of like beads that you can connect to make a necklace, okay, or individual cards in a train. And then what you can do is you can connect them together, and I'll tell you how in a bit. Right? And you would get a long chain. And this would be a polymer. Polymer. And that's the macromolecule. Right? So earlier we say polyester, right? That's a polymer of many esters linked together. Okay. Many of the plastics are polyethylene. That's many ethylene linked together. We can also break it apart, and you would get the monomers back. Okay. So keep this visual representation in your mind as we talk about how we build different polymers. So different polymers have different building blocks. Okay, don't worry about memorizing it just yet. Okay, we'll get to it when we discuss these things in detail. Okay, so carbohydrates, the name of the polymer is polysaccharide, and its building block is monosaccharide. Right? For protein, the monomers are amino acids. So different types of polymers have different building blocks, which totally makes sense. Okay, like the things you would use to build a GO train, for example, is going to be a different building blocks than like a TTC subway, right? Even though they are both trains, but because you're building different things, you would need to have different subunits. So similar situation here, even though they're all polymers, but depending on what you're building, the subunits, the building blocks are going to be different. So let's take a closer look here. Now, don't worry too much about what the hexagon represent at this moment, okay? It will make sense in a couple of more slides, okay? You will know what the hexagon means. Like it would be too confusing for me to explain now. So just, ignore that. Just think of the hexagon as part of a molecule. So in this this whole thing here, this is a monomer. And then here we have another monomer. And many of these monomers, these building blocks that we're going to be looking at, they would have an OH on them, right? An oxygen and a hydrogen. And if you want to glue the monomers together, if you want to put them together and join them chemically, what needs to be done is you need to remove a hydrogen from one of them, and you need to remove an OH from the other. Once you've done that, you can connect the two monomers together, and then you have this thing as the product. Okay. So what happens to the hydrogen and the OH that you remove? Well, they actually join together to form a water molecule. Okay. So when you join monomers together, you have to remove a water molecule. So two monomers can join chemically through a dehydration synthesis. You're removing the water molecule. You are dehydrating it. Okay? And another word for removing water is condensation, right? Like you have condensation on your window, you have water on your window, right? So that's the chemical reaction. If we go back to this drawing, right, from monomer to polymer, right, this is called dehydration or condensation reaction. And you have to remove water molecule. Right? You have to remove water molecule. So let's take a closer look at this. Let's say I have 5 of these monomers, and I want to join all of them together. I want to join all of them together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in order to do that, how many water molecules do we need to remove? Let me start a poll for you. How many water molecules do I need to remove? Okay, let me give you some choices. Okay. 4, 5, 6, 7. Not sure. Okay. How many water molecules do we need to remove? Let me know. Okay. Very good. Most people got it right. Let me explain. Well, if I need to connect this guy and this guy together, then that's one bond, one water molecule, two water molecules, 3 and 4. So I would need to have 4 H2O. Okay? That's dehydration or condensation reaction. So that's when you need to build polymers. The opposite is to convert from a polymer back into a monomer. And you will need to do that if you are trying to digest your food. And when you eat your pasta, rice, bread, those carbohydrates that you consume are long chains of carbohydrates, and you need to add water to it to break it down. So the process is called hydrolysis. Hydro means water. We talked about this earlier, right? Like hydrophobic, hydrophilic. Lysis is to break. Okay, so hydrolysis is to basically break something by addition of water. And that's what we do here. We take the water molecule, we put it back into the bond, and we separate it. Okay, so when we go back to this picture here, polymer to monomer, we do hydrolysis. Hydrolysis, where you have to add water molecule. Okay, so if your chain has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 balls here, 10 monomers, you need to add 9 water molecules to break it apart. Okay. Let's do one more poll, and then we're going to take a quick break. So we have a pentagon looking monomer here, and we have we have a hexagon looking monomer here and a pentagon looking monomer here. And if you want to join them together chemically, what would the product look like? Okay, great. Thanks for participating. The correct answer is B, right? So you basically have to look for something that has a hexagon, which is right here. And then you need to look for something that has the pentagon, right? Pentagon right here. And when you use dehydration synthesis, you need to remove a hydrogen and an OH. So there is going to be an oxygen left connecting them together. Okay, so this is the correct answer. All right. Any questions before we take the break? Already. I will see you in 5 minutes, okay? 1:37. 1:37. Okay, let's keep going. Now we're going to shift our focus to talk about actual macromolecules. Now that we know how we build them, right? So the first one we're going to talk about is the carbohydrates right here. Carbohydrates. So let's start with some basic. Okay, so for each of the macromolecules, the carbohydrates, the proteins, the lipids, and the nucleic acid, I want you to keep in mind a couple of things. Okay? Number one, I want you to keep in mind what kind of atoms mix them up. You want to know their biological function. You want to know their monomers, and you want to know their food source. Okay, so types of atoms, um, the biological functions, monomers, and food source. So let's start with carbohydrates, or carbs, right? People call them. They are organic molecules, and they always contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. The name carbohydrate is referring to the chemical formula. There is always one part carbon and one part hydrate. Hydrate is basically H2O. So the chemical formula is CH2O, and then N can be any number. For example, if N is 6, then we have C6H12, because 2 times 6 is 12, and then O6. And then this, you might start to recognize, is glucose. You can have different N numbers. Okay? You can have N equals to 12, then you have C12H24O12, right? So different N numbers. We're not going to learn all of them, but you should know as we go on that glucose is C6H12O6. What do we need carbohydrates for? Well, it is actually the main source of energy for many organisms, including us. Right? When we burn carbohydrates, when we burn glucose particularly, we are able to get quick short-term cellular energy. In some organisms, carbohydrates can form important structures, particularly true in plants and animals. Some animals, okay? Not us though. We don't have carbohydrates for structure, but things like clams or crustaceans, so like things with a hard shell on the outside, like crabs, lobsters, they use carbohydrates for structural components of the hard shells. The fibers in plants, they are made up of carbohydrates. For humans and other mammals, for example, we primarily use carbohydrates as fuel. So how do we actually burn carbohydrates and produce energy? We use a process called cellular respiration. And this is a very important process that we will spend a whole lecture learning about in number 5, okay, lecture 5. But for now, you should start try to start to memorize the equation. Okay, so we take glucose, which is going to be in the food that we eat, and we're going to react it with the oxygen that we breathe. And in the process, we convert it into carbon dioxide that we breathe out, water, as well as energy. Everything that we do as a living organism requires energy, right? To understand what I'm trying to tell you here, to remember the things I'm telling you, to write down the notes, to just sit there, or your heart beating, breathing, all those things requires energy. So, your cells, trillions of them, are constantly burning glucose to supply that energy so that we can do all the things that we do. And the process by which it happens is called cellular respiration. And we're not the only organism that does this, okay? Other animals can do this as well, okay? Burning glucose. Plants, they also do this, by the way, to produce energy. Sources of carbohydrates in diet. Where can we get carbohydrates? Well, I already told you, starchy stuff are gonna have a lot of carbohydrates in it. Okay? Rice, corn, wheat, potatoes, yam, right? All these things are gonna have quite a bit of carbohydrates in it. And these are like staple food for many cultures, right? Fructose is another type of carbohydrates. And as the name implies, fructose are readily available in fruits. If it's sweet, it has fructose in it. If you let the banana sit and ripen, and it tastes very, very sweet, and it has a very high fructose content in it. Corn syrup also has a lot of fructose in it. Lactose is another one, which is found in dairy product. You probably heard of people who are lactose intolerant. More on that later. The kitchen sugar or table sugar, the one that we have for cooking, that's called sucrose. And you will find them in candy bars. So a lot of different types of carbohydrates. And as I said earlier in the lesson, some carbohydrates are healthier than others, right? Like, these carbohydrates are probably not too good for your body, but they taste so good. These are better, right? And even for starch, it depends. Some starch is better than others. Right? Like if you are diabetic, you're actually not encouraged to eat potato for carbohydrates. Okay, you're encouraged to eat more complex carbohydrates like quinoa or brown rice, right? Those tends to be more complex carbohydrates, and your body will burn it slowly, and that helps you maintain your blood glucose level. So if you think about what you ate for lunch, you can, think about which part of your lunch was actually carbohydrates. Okay, and my guess is quite a bit of it. All right, let's take a closer look at the building blocks for carbohydrate. What do we actually use to connect together, those red balls that I drew earlier, right? What are those monomers to build a carbohydrate? There are 3 monomers that I want you to learn for carbohydrates. They are glucose, which I already told you about, fructose, and something called galactose. Okay? And this is how they look like. Glucose looks like this with a hexagon shape. And that's what it meant. Like when we go back to here, like this hexagon here, that's basically representing a glucose. And this pentagon, that's basically representing a fructose. You see the pentagon here? Okay. So you are not responsible for drawing any of these or recognizing them. I'm never going to give you a picture of this and I ask you to tell me what it is. Okay. You don't have to know that. Okay. You just have to memorize the names though. I could give you a list of stuff and I say, which of the following are monomers of carbohydrates? You should know it's glucose, fructose, and galactose. So these are single sugar molecules. We call them mono. Mono is single. Saccharide. Saccharide is sugar. Literally, this means single sugar. Okay. Mono, like a monorail has a single track, right? Okay. Saccharide sugar. Questions? All right. So glucose and fructose are monosaccharides. They are single sugar, right? So they're single and they're ready to mingle. They can come together. You can connect them together through dehydration or condensation reaction. You can see here, you remove the hydrogen, remove the OH here, and you can connect them together, form a bond. And of course, you're going to remove the water molecule. And in the end, you have a sucrose molecule. Okay, so now it's no longer a monosaccharide. It's no longer a single sugar. It's double. So it's called a disaccharide. Does anybody remember where we find sucrose? I told you earlier, just want to jog your memory a little bit. Where do you find sucrose, huh? Okay, I see
Some
you.
of
Yeah, go ahead.
some of the juice that they call it for, I don't know, maybe that one is a
Sure, right?
diet.
Juice, yeah, but a lot of people also got it right in the chat box. Table sugar. Okay, this is the kitchen sugar. All right. If you open your kitchen cabinet, you see the sugar there. That's the sucrose. Okay, it's the same stuff you add to your tea or coffee or whatever. Okay, so that actually consists of glucose and fructose. Okay. So it turns out you can combine the monosaccharides in different combinations, and you can generate different types of disaccharides. Okay, so all these here, all these things, all these here on the left, they are monosaccharide. And all these things here, these are the disaccharide. Okay, so the monosaccharides, we can take glucose and we chemically connect it with another glucose, we get maltose. Okay. If you look at the ingredient of candy bar, most of the time you'll be able to find maltose in the ingredients. Glucose plus galactose, yeah, and beer, yeah, malt, right? Exactly. Glucose and which is why beer is have a lot of calories, right? And people can gain a lot of weight by drinking too much. Glucose and galactose makes lactose. Okay, where do we find lactose again? Do you remember? Dairy product. There you go. Very good. By the way, for those of you who think I'm answering my own questions, I'm not, okay? Well, after I ask a question and then when I say the answer, I'm just reading what people are typing in the chat box, okay? So in case you think I'm crazy or something, okay? Glucose plus fructose, what do you get? Glucose plus fructose gives you the kitchen sugar, okay? The sucrose. Right? So let's talk a little bit more about lactose intolerant. We know lactose are, in dairy product, and once again, you get lactose when you combine glucose with galactose together, right? So when we digest our food, each kind of molecules that we digest, we actually need a special enzyme for it. Okay, an enzyme is usually a kind of protein. We'll learn more about enzymes later. But basically, if you need to break down lactose, we need an enzyme for it. And the enzyme is called lactase. Okay. Some people do not have that enzyme. Okay, they cannot make it because of like a genetic mutation. So when they consume dairy product, they cannot break down the lactose in the food, and instead the bacteria in the intestines are breaking down the lactose for them. And all this extra bacterial activity results in a lot of gas production and leads to bloating and even diarrhea. But thanks to modern, pharmaceutical products, people who are lactose intolerant, they can take one of these pills. Okay? They can take the tablet, which is essentially the lactase, and you take that before you enjoy your milkshake or ice cream, and then you will be able to break it down, no problem. Okay, so that's lactose intolerant. Okay, recap. Right? We're talking about macromolecules. Specifically, we're talking about carbohydrates. We know there are monomers for carbohydrates, the monosaccharides, glucose, fructose, galactose. We can combine them in different combinations to get disaccharides, right? But why stop at 2? You can actually continue to build bigger and bigger molecules, right? Continue to build the chain so that it becomes very, very, very long. And sometimes it can be hundreds or thousands of units long. These are what we call polysaccharides. Okay, polysaccharides, right? So we are going to look at a few common polysaccharides. I'll tell you the names first. Cellulose, glycogen, and starch. Okay? All of these are polymers of glucose. Right? They don't have any of the other monomers. No fructose, no galactose. It's just a bunch of glucose connected together. The difference between them is how the glucose are being connected together. Okay, I'll show you in the upcoming slides. Okay, some of these are less complicated in structure compared to others. It's all about how you connect the glucose. So cellulose. Cellulose is found in plant fibers. And when we learn the cell unit, you will know that plant cells have a wall around them, has a protective wall. So cells is what makes up living organisms. So this is what a cell looks like. And for plant cells, they have an extra barrier around them. And this extra barrier is called the cell wall. That's what makes your vegetable crunchy. That's the fiber, okay? And the type of carbohydrate that makes up the fiber is called cellulose, okay? We do not have cellulose. We can eat cellulose. We can eat plant, right? When we eat our vegetables, we consume cellulose, but we cannot digest the cellulose. Okay? From a nutrition standpoint, from a food source standpoint, the cellulose gives us nothing. Okay, they just pass through our digestive tract and then it comes out the other end. Okay, but dietary fibers are good for us even though we cannot extract energy from it because they help stimulate our digestive tract and help move things along. If you look at a cow, like if you observe a cow, they never stop chewing. Okay, they just keep on, their mouths are always moving. That's because their diet has a lot of cellulose in it, okay? They are able to break down the cellulose because they have special bacteria that are living in their stomach to help them break down the cellulose for energy, okay? But even so, it's very difficult to completely break it down. Do you guys know like cow has multiple stomachs? Some of you might know that, okay? And when they chew the food, it goes down to the stomach. They actually have to regurgitate. They have to like barf it back up, and then they have to chew more, and then it goes down again to a different stomach, and then they have to do this a couple of times before they can fully break down the cellulose. Okay. A fun fact on the side: every time the cow burps up the food to chew again, the burp that they create actually has a lot of greenhouse gas in it. There's a lot of methane in it. And believe it or not, the cow burbs from cow farms is actually a major contributor to greenhouse gas globally. Okay, so they're trying to, train cows. This is for real. You can look it up. They're trying to train cows to burp in special containers that would capture the carbon to help, reduce the greenhouse gas emission. Anyway, back to the cellulose. It is the most abundant carbohydrates on the planet because there are a lot of plants. And like I said, we cannot digest it. We don't have that special bacteria. Right? But you should still have a healthy ingestion of fibers, okay, to keep your intestinal tract, healthy and moving. Okay, starch. Starch is the storage form of energy in plants. Plants make their own food, right? By staying in the sun. Right? The process is called photosynthesis. Right? If you didn't know that, we'll learn about it later on. But they make food. And plants, they have to make more food in good weather in summer, for example, so that they have enough energy reserved for the winters when it's colder and less sunlight, and they store the food usually in the roots or in the stem. So potato is an example. Potato is like a root, right? And they store all the starch in it. They want to use it themselves, but of course, we as humans, we harvest them and then we eat it for food, right? But nevertheless, starch is a storage form of energy in plants, and they have long chains of glucose with multiple branches. So you can think of the starch as like this, okay? There is a main strand. Like if you zoom in, it would be like glucose, 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 like this, all the way to the other end. And then every now and then it would branch off. Right? So that's glucose branch, glucose branch. So it's almost like a tree branch. And that's basically what starch is. Storage form of energy, okay, for plants. We humans don't store sugar, don't store carbohydrates as starch. Okay, we eat starch, but if we consume more than we need, then we store it as glycogen. Glycogen. Glycogen is even more branched, like here, than glucose, than starch. You have the main branch, and then you have these branches that are coming off of the main branch, and then you have more sub-branching. Okay, so it's in terms of complexity, it's much more complex than starch. And starch, compared to like cellulose, I forgot to mention it here. Cellulose is just a long single branch like that. Okay, here you have multiple single branch, and what they actually do is they get braid together like a rope, and it becomes really, really strong. Okay, so glycogen is stored in muscle as well as liver. Okay, many people don't know this. I found out people don't know where their liver is. Okay, do you know where your liver is? Is it on the right or is it on the left? I mean, you don't have to tell me. You can just think about it. Okay, like you try to find where your liver is. Okay, so your liver is actually this is your diaphragm, right, which separates your chest from your abdominal cavity, and the liver is right here. Okay, on the right side, underneath your diaphragm, and the liver do many things, and one of the things it does is it stores glycogen for you. So if you didn't have lunch and you're just running on fuels that you store in the liver right now, then the glycogens are actually being converted back into glucose, so you can burn them for fuel while you are, sort of fasting at the moment. Okay. So in this picture, it summarizes the 3 types of polysaccharides. The potato, which is starch, storage form of energy in plants. In the muscle, we have glycogen, and the leaves would contains the cellulose. These are actual pictures of what they look like when you look at them under high resolution microscope. Now, the last kind of polysaccharide is called chitin. That's how you pronounce it, okay? Not chitin, it's chitin. Chitin, the monomer is a special kind of glucose, okay, that contains nitrogen in it. You don't have to recognize it. You just have to know it's a modified kind of glucose. And it makes it really, really hard. And therefore, it's used to form shells of crustacean as well as insects. Because insects have exoskeleton, right? Like you and I, we have an endoskeleton. Our bony structure is inside, but for bugs, their shell is on the outside, right? So that material is also made up of chitin. Okay, it's very strong, even stronger than cellulose in some cases. And actually, chitin are useful once we discover them and we figure out how to kind of manufacture them. They are used in sutures, surgical sutures, right? And it's very good for the wound healing because chitin is biodegradable. So if you remove your wisdom teeth or something and they stitch you up with chitin, the stitches will just melt in your mouth, right? And you don't have to go back and take out the stitches, which is what they used to have to do, decades ago. So that helps with the healing process, and it also leaves behind less of a scar. I mean, nobody's gonna care about a scar in your gum, right? But like they could use this for like external sutures as well, right? Like if they have to do like if they have to cut you open in the abdomen or something like that, right? They could also use chitin to stitch you back up. Okay, let's see how much you remember. I know it's a lot of material. I understand it can be overwhelming, but what if you're allergic to shellfish? Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So it's not like they don't actually take the chitin directly from the shellfish, right? Okay, it's all manufactured in a lab, right? So there's actually no shellfish component in the chitin in the sutures. Great question. Yeah, so like the test, the quiz, there are going to be some questions like these, very straightforward. It's just a matter of remembering it, right? And the answer would be glucose plus fructose. Very good. Okay, and then there will be questions like these, which are a little bit harder. You gotta read a lot, and it says select all the false statement. That means there are more than one possible answers, and you have to choose all of the correct ones. In this case, all the incorrect ones, in order to get full marks. So give that a try, please. Okay, that was a minute and a half. I only got 5 people, 6 people, 7 people now. But I'm gonna end the poll, okay, and take it up. All right, we're looking for the false statement. We're looking for the ones that are not true. So let's take a look at the first one. Oops, let's take a look at the first one here. Polysaccharides are important both for energy storage and to provide structure to cells. That's correct. Okay, we're looking for the false one. So we should not be choosing this one, right? Energy storage in plants and animals. structure for plants and in some animals as well. Glycogen is important both for energy storage and provide structure for cells. That's incorrect. That's the false statement. Glycogen does not provide structure for cells. They only provide energy storage for animals, stored in liver and muscle. Cellulose is only found in animals, not true. They are found in plants. Okay. Glucose, fructose, and galactose are examples of monosaccharides. That is true, so we don't choose it. Starch is a storage polysaccharide made by plant cells. That is also correct. We don't choose it. So B and C are incorrect. Okay. Now, I don't think I'm gonna keep doing new things. Okay, if I do more new things, I think you guys are gonna like lose it. It's already a lot of information. So maybe I just take a moment and fill this in with you. Okay, because we have about 10 minutes, and you know, I don't, like I said, I don't like to waste time. So let's just do this together here. It's in your study guide. Hopefully you print it out. If not, you can easily just copy these as we go on. Okay, so using a diagram below, show how a bond is formed between two glucose molecules. So that's a glucose molecule, that's a glucose molecule. And if you want to join molecules together, we have to do, let me write down the name for you again. It's called dehydration synthesis. Oh, hold on, the program is a little bit weird. Let's see if I can fix that. Dehydration synthesis or condensation reaction, right? So in order for this to happen, you will have to remove a water molecule. It's not letting me change color. It's okay, we'll stick with the blue then. So you will remove an OH here, and you'll remove an H. Now I know you're thinking, like, how do I know it's this OH and this H? Like, how come it's not this OH and that H, right? Like, don't worry about it. I'm not gonna ask you to draw it on the test. Okay. The key thing to know is you have to remove an H and you have to remove an OH, and then this is gonna come out as H2O. And then afterwards, you will be able to form a bond. Okay, let me just try to restart the program here because I really need to have that different color. There we go. So then you're going to be able to form a new bond together. Okay, so this is actually a covalent bond that connects the carbons to the two monosaccharides together. Okay. Now these here, maltose, sucrose, lactose, these are disaccharide, right? Disaccharide. So why don't you take a moment and try to fill it in? Okay. They are all going to have at least one glucose in it. Glucose, and glucose. Now try to figure out what is the missing monosaccharide here. How do you get maltose? Yeah, thank you, Trisha. Glucose and glucose is gonna give you maltose. Okay, some people are confused, like how can you put two of the same thing and get something new, right? Well, think of it like this. If you have a square and you combine with another square, you end up having a rectangle, right? It's kind of like that, okay? How about sucrose? To get sucrose, you would take glucose and you add it with fructose. And the last one is easy because if you want to get lactose, the thing you need to add is galactose. Okay, like it actually has the word lactose in it, right? So on the quiz, I'm gonna ask you like, which of the following is the building block for sucrose? Then you have to choose glucose and fructose. Which of the following is a disaccharide? Like you have to know. Okay, so again, just to emphasize the point, these are monosaccharide. Single sugar, double sugar. And these are the polysaccharides. You can get multiple glucose and you connect them together. Sometimes you just form a straight chain. Sometimes you have branching or even more branching. Then you will get these different kinds of polysaccharide. Starting with starch, where can it be found? Well, you will find them in stem or root of plants. And what do we use them for? I'm sorry, what do the plants use them for? Main biological function. Storage form of energy in plants. Okay. So this is what you should be doing after the lecture while it's still fresh in your head, right? Like if you wait for a couple of days and you come back to this, it's like as if you never heard of it before, right? But if it's still fresh in your head, then writing it down is going to help you remember the answer a little bit better, hopefully. Okay, so let's finish this. Glycogen, where can you find glycogen? In the body, where do you find them?
Liver and muscle?
Exactly, right? In the muscle, liver of animals. Okay, and then that would be a storage form of energy in animals. Cellulose, you will find it in the cell wall of plants, of plant cells. And they are important for structural support. Chitin, you will find chitin in the exoskeleton of insects and crustacean. Crustacean, which are like, crabs and lobster and whatnot, right? I think that's how you spell crustacean, sorry. The main biological function is, again, structural support. Okay, that's it for today. On Thursday, we will learn the rest of it, which is lipids, proteins, and nucleic acid. Okay, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for coming. See you Thursday. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Sir, I have a question, please.
Yeah, go ahead.
So for the polysaccharide, we can only